A sunset cruise turns into a murder mystery.
How could the promise of a vacation be turned in such a horrible way?
With little to go on, investigators are stumped.
We spent a lot of time thinking we may be on the right trail, but every trail was really, really cool.
A profiler provides a chilling clue.
He would be an everyday guy that he could be your neighbor.
Then, a local woman finds a crucial piece of evidence.
I looked at that paper, and my knees went out from under me. I mean, it was just bam.
One detective is determined to find the killer.
It was too compelling of a case to just be satisfied with, well, we just can't figure it out.
For 3 years, Detective Glenn Moore investigated one of the most notorious homicide cases in Florida's history. When his leads turned cold, he drove the streets of Tampa, searching for anything that might lead him to a serial killer.
I was out to catch a demon. For whatever reason, God put me in that position to go after him. We are in a time and period in our society in which angels and demons are at a heightened time of battle over the souls of men.
It all began Sunday morning, June 4th, 1989. The Coast Guard finds the bodies of 3 women floating in Tampa Bay. The 3 unidentified females are bound with duct tape and weighted with cinder blocks. The police tag them Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, and Jane Doe 3. The coroner says it's possible the women were thrown overboard alive.
You don't really want to think about what they went through because it's too painful for people to think about actually their last thoughts and their last moments alive. There weren't many clues left behind because our scene consisted of the water. When you don't have a room or a house or something where you can really process it, knowing that you're gonna maybe get the killer's fingerprints, you have to work with what you have.
I'm kind of a big forensic kind of person. I believe in the fibers and the hairs and that kind of stuff. We collected all that and immediately sent it to the FBI. If I wanted to know about the wind and the water and where the bodies floated, I contacted an expert at the University of South Florida. If I wanted to know about tides or how boats work, I contacted the United States Coast Guard.
Police combed through missing person reports with no luck.
The first thing you have to do in any investigation is determine who the actual victim is, and that's possibly going to lead you to who the suspects are. In this particular case, we had no identification because there wasn't any identification whatsoever on the victims.
Investigators conduct hundreds of interviews and canvass the waterfront for eyewitnesses. 4 days later, police get a call from the manager of a local motel. He tells police that a room registered to a woman named Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters has been vacant for 7 days, and they did not check out. Detective Capel and his team enter room 251 of the Days Inn in Tampa.
There were balloons, there was stuffed animals, there was toys laying around, ladies' makeup was on the counter. It was like somebody just had stepped out for dinner and was planning on coming back.
Crime scene technicians dust for prints.
He received from a tube of toothpaste a fingerprint, which he told me he positively identified with the fingerprints taken from one of the bodies.
The prints belong to 36-year-old Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters, 17-year-old Michelle and 14-year-old Christy of Wilshire, Ohio.
They were farm girls from Ohio who'd never been anywhere in their lives. Hardly their mother hadn't really either. And they were looking forward to this trip to Florida and Disney World and all the attractions in Florida. And they were just innocent kids coming to Florida to have a good time.
Sergeant Moore often returned to the motel to retrace the victim's steps.
You'd always be looking for some key thing that maybe you go, oh, all of a sudden something jumps out at you that you didn't see before.
Moore tried to understand how a family could have been taken in by a stranger.
I can see him getting lured into it, especially if he came across the mom and they felt safe with mom, you know?
Police find the Rogers car abandoned at a boat dock only a mile away. Inside the car, police discover a travel brochure along with Days Inn stationery with handwritten directions on them. The puzzling words, blue with white, are scribbled on the stationery. Investigators examine snapshots of the Rogers dream vacation. There is a photo of Michelle at the motel. Her hair still damp from a shower. She looks ready to go out. But where? And with whom?
You're in the Magic Kingdom. You shouldn't have to be afraid of anything. And that's one of the things that's amazing about the case is that the myth of Florida, this myth that we sell, in some ways is responsible for their death.
Weeks pass and leads dwindle. Investigators say their best tips have been exhausted. Police offer a $5,000 reward for information. 4 months later, Detective Jim Capel learns that a Canadian woman had been sexually assaulted on board a blue and white boat in Tampa Bay, only 2 weeks before the murder of the Rogers women. The similarities between the two crimes were striking. Capel's instincts tell him this could be a major lead. He calls the victim.
I just told her how important it was that I speak with her, and that how I felt at the time that her sexual battery case was probably involved in the triple murder case. I felt really sure of that at the time. It was kind of a feeling of this could be a break, this could be one of the bigger breaks.
Capel goes to Canada to interview the victim. She tells him that her attacker was a middle-aged white man who convinced her to go out for a boat ride. She says he bound her with duct tape and raped her.
Well, he threatened to throw me overboard so the sharks could eat me, and I didn't know if there were sharks out there or not, but I've seen too many programs where they were, and I did what he said.
Capel now believes that the Madeira Beach rapist is the same man who killed the Rogers women. The Canadian woman helps a police artist craft a composite sketch of the rapist. When the sketch is released to the local papers, hundreds of tips pour in.
Some of them sounded promising. Almost all of them turned out to be blind alleys with little or no relevance to the case as a whole. And it was tremendously frustrating.
So 1 year after the bodies of Jo Rogers and her 2 daughters were found floating in Tampa Bay, Jim Capel's investigation comes to a dead end.
We spent a lot of time thinking we may be on the right trail, but every trail was really, really cold.
The killer may still be walking the streets of Tampa.
One of the things that's most haunting about the case is how the killer just inverted everything and twisted things that are beautiful and good into something unbelievably ugly. How could the promise of a vacation, your only family vacation of your lives, which was the only time they got a chance to do that, Joe and the girls, that promise be turned in such a horrible way? He used all these and the promise of Florida and the sunshine and the beach and Mickey Mouse. He took that really kind of wonderful myth and used it as a weapon.
Because there were no solid clues in Florida, the investigation into the murder of the Rogers women turned to their home in Wilshire, Ohio.
Initially, you have to look at family contacts and other reasons why people would want to kill, because we don't normally think in terms of serial type killers on all these types of things. I mean, you normally check all the things from closest to the victims and you start to spread out.
Detectives question Hal Rogers, a man who today still struggles with his loss.
Yeah, I miss my kids. They're kind of stuck at their 14 and 18, 19. I don't even remember some days, I mean, it's been 13 years. One would have been 30 years old. It's kind of scary. I can't picture it that way. Chris would have been 27. It's kind of scary. I'm just wondering what their life would have been like. I miss my wife very much, too.
Investigators study postcards the girls sent home, hoping to find a clue that would lead them to their killer.
Stayed the night at Titusville, leaving for SeaWorld, then Disney World tonight for 3 nights. Weather is hot, humidity is very high. Kids having a great time, dragging me everywhere. Better go, have to get Christy out of bed. Love ya, take care, don't work too hard.
But they find only details of a happy road trip.
Hi. Yesterday we went to the zoo in Jacksonville. Later we went to Silver Springs and rode on a glass-bottom boat. Today we are going to a beach and then to SeaWorld. I miss you. Love, Shell.
It was Sunday, June 4th. Hal began to worry because the girls were due back in Ohio. 5 days later, police told Hal the bad news.
You know it's real, but you ain't real sure. You know it is, but it isn't, but it is. And it still don't seem real. I come to conclusion when I talk just like now. I'm looking at it as a third person.
Hal Rogers had stayed behind to work his farm while his family made their fateful journey.
I basically got gaps where I don't remember a year or so in there at all. I think I do, but I don't really think I do. You ain't real sure if it's real or not. Biggest thing is, I had real good friends. If I didn't feel like staying home, I'd just go over there and go in and lay down on the couch and go to sleep. They didn't think nothing about it. They didn't worry about it. It's just one day at a time. If one day's too much, you go by hour by hour. If that's too much, you just figure, well, I'll get through the next 5 minutes and go on from there.
2 weeks after the bodies of the Rogers women were found, they were buried in Van Wert, Ohio.
Life goes on whether you want it to or not. You know, I work my 15 hours a day and called it good enough.
He was very close to the girls and to his wife. They worked together. They not only shared their home, but they worked the farm together as a family. And it was not only devastating for him emotionally with their loss, but he had to hire people, and it was financially tough on him, too.
But because Hal shows little emotion at his family's funeral, there are rumors in Wilshire that Hal may have had something to do with his family's murder.
And I think Hal and the others were just doing their best to get through it day by day. But the things he was doing to help him hang on were some of the very things that made some of the people suspect him.
Even during the investigation as it went along, people would say, I read the paper and I know the father did it.
At the time, there was a heck of a lot of controversy swirling around about it, about how maybe I did it and all this. And there's still people that ain't ever really going to be sure because they don't know. The people that ain't sure are scared to death because something like that could happen to them.
Well, the police ascertained pretty quickly that Hal was seen on the farm the day of the murder and the day after, and that it would have been very, very difficult, if I think impossible with the flight schedules, to get down to Tampa Bay to do that. But they had to consider the possibility that he had hired someone.
There was a question of Hal Rogers taking some money out of the bank, approximately $7,000, and we were wondering where the money was.
Because that's suspicious. That's something you got to at least consider, is that he took out the money really to hire somebody. And Hal, as I recall, he had $1,000 in his pocket, and he had $6,000 in the glove compartment.
By the way, you had some money drawn out. Where's it at? And I says, it's laying on the dash of the truck in an envelope. That's where it was.
So him being able to find them or to hire somebody to hurt them, it wasn't done. We accounted for all of his money. We accounted for his time there in Ohio and everything.
Then it is Hal's brother John who catches the attention of investigators.
Well, in the a couple years before the murders, it was discovered that John Rogers, who was Hal's brother, was accused of raping a former or a roommate of his, who was a former girlfriend. And the police also found evidence as they investigated that to show that he had molested and raped Michelle, the older daughter.
But when they look further, the promising lead becomes another dead end.
Michelle did not want to testify. She did not want to go through trial. And they decided to drop charges in Michelle's case, so he didn't have a revenge motive toward Michelle. He had nothing to gain by having her killed.
With the family eliminated as suspects and no significant leads in the Madeira Beach rape, most of the investigators are taken off the case. Some worry whether the crime will ever be solved.
If it went unanswered and we didn't do something about it, if the rest of us didn't care and remember them, and that would be beyond horrific.
When we return, a new team restarts the investigation. June 1st, 1990, the one-year anniversary of the murders of Joe, Michelle, and Christy Rogers. More than 1,200 leads have been investigated, but the case is ice cold. Glenn Moore now becomes the lead detective.
This is too compelling of a case, too compelling of a crime to just be satisfied with, well, we just can't figure it out. So, I don't know, it was just something inside me drove me to say, that's not good enough. We need to find out more answers. It's hard to understand how three women could end up in the bay tied up with concrete blocks around their neck, and three women from Ohio. I mean, how does that happen?
Sergeant Moore assembles a new investigative team.
He picked several detectives and an FBI agent, someone from the state attorney's office, and someone from Tampa PD to review the case together. We all sat together, we met together every day.
Moore's got a hunch that somewhere a fact has been overlooked, that somewhere there's a tiny thread that will unravel the entire mystery.
We need to really, really look at this evidence with a fine-tooth comb and see if there's something in the evidence that we missed the first time around.
We decided everything needed to be processed, no matter how insignificant it seems. And no matter how long you work on a case or how many cases you work, you're always going to make mistakes and miss things. That's human nature.
When you do an autopsy of a body, I mean, you slice it open and you dissect it. You'll find that most homicide investigations don't really do that with their evidence. They take the initial look at the body of evidence, and it goes to the evidence room, and whatever initial processing was asked to be done on that maybe is done. But there's not a real close examination of every dot and tittle of that evidence.
Moore calls on Detective Sindra Leedy to begin a new study of the physical evidence.
I looked at the rope, the way they were tied, the way that the duct tape was put across their mouth and their nose in layers. And I try to always look at the photographs to learn something about the killer or what happened, or the sequence, the order in which something happened.
Based on her examination of the way the ropes were tied, Detective Leedy theorizes what might have happened that night on Tampa Bay. When the killer started tying them up with no way of escaping, they had to be consumed with fear. The detective says that until the killer brought out the cement blocks, the Rogers women could not have known their fate.
We believe Michelle Rogers was thrown in the water alive. She struggled, she freed her hands from the rope. Christy was alive when she went in the water. She reversed her hands and hid the knot, so she was trying to get out of her rope.
This killer's particular sicknesses was that he enjoyed hurting someone in front of someone they love.
Detective Leedy now shifts her focus to a piece of evidence that had been overlooked during the initial investigation, the brochure found in the car.
It had never been fingerprinted before. And then we got some prints off of it, and it turns out the big thing we got off of it was a palm print.
There are also questions about the handwritten directions found on the brochure.
The handwriting had not been analyzed to see, okay, whose writing was it? After you examined it, you realize this was some instructions on how to get to the motel from somewhere in Tampa.
Investigators send the brochure to a handwriting expert for analysis. The expert determines that the scribbled directions were not written by any of the Rogers women.
Which gave us a clue that maybe they were lost and they met someone and someone gave them instructions on how to get to the motel. That someone would know where they were going.
Detective Leedy and Sergeant Moore are now sure that the handwriting and unidentified palm print found on the brochure belong to the killer.
That person knows they were at the motel, so that person could conceivably contact them.
They also remember the note that was scribbled on the Days Inn stationery, the description of the killer's boat.
We got lots of leads on blue and white boats. I mean, seems like thousands of people in Tampa area have blue and white boats. So you check out a lot of those leads. We never got a lead on the right blue and white boat.
Meanwhile, in a suburban neighborhood not far away, a woman named Joanne Steffi stares at the newspaper clipping on her refrigerator. She had taped it there over a year earlier when the police first released the composite sketch of the Madeira Beach rape suspect.
I read the article, looked at the composite, got in my car and started out, and as I went by his house, it hit. I just looked over at his house and I said, my God, it's him.
Steffi thought the sketch resembled a red-haired contractor who lived only 2 doors down.
He was attracted to women. I don't care what your age. I think he was just electric. Anytime I talked to him or was around him, literally the hair on the back of my neck would stand up. I would get the creeps. He wouldn't look at you. He wouldn't look you in the eye. There was just something about his mannerisms. He wasn't right. He wasn't being honest. He wasn't being sincere. He scared me.
One night, Steffi says she became even more concerned when she caught him watching her.
Back, say, 15, 20 feet in the yard, and peering over towards my house, the window that was at. So I turned off all the lights and stood there and watched him because I was scared. This was after I had seen the composite, and I was really scared. So I watched him. It lasted 5 to 10 minutes. I couldn't tell you how long. He was either looking at my window or back and forth or looking at the young girls across the street upstairs.
Friends told Steffi that their neighbor didn't look like the drawing and warned her that unsubstantiated accusations could ruin a man's life. Terrified, Steffi never called police. Meanwhile, Sergeant Moore asks the Behavioral Science Unit of the FBI to formulate a profile of the killer.
The FBI's analysis of it was that this was a guy who had lived in the area for quite some time. He knew the area very well. He knew how to direct these women exactly to that motel they were going to. This was somebody that knew the Tampa Bay area well. Probably was involved in business here and that type of thing. If that was the case, it wouldn't be easy for him to just pack up and move, probably. So he was an established person in our community.
The FBI profiler confirms their theory that the killer planned the murder, chose his victims, used a weapon, isolated them out on the bay, and used duct tape to keep them in control. He raped them and then weighed them down with cement blocks as he threw them into the water alive.
One of the things the profiler said is the reason he did not put duct tape over their eyes is because he wanted to see the fear in their eyes as he tormented them.
The FBI gives them one more chilling clue.
We were looking for a serial killer, and that's one of the things that the profilers told us, is that this person has killed before the Rogers women and will kill again, because he chose 3 victims this time. And a first-time killer doesn't do that.
As I was driving around, whether it was on duty or off duty, I was constantly trying to be in the field of the killer, where he would be, what he was thinking. And I would drive different areas that I knew that he had been on, I knew the victims had been on, and see, was there anything that ever spoke to you that would give you some insight into what happened? So I began to study a lot of serial murder cases and that I had never cared about paying attention to before that much, but I wanted to know what these evil people were like. So, you know, in a way, I did lose a lot of innocence as far as discovering how dark the dark side can be in this world.
Glenn Moore is deeply religious.
He feels very strongly as a fundamentalist that good and evil are not just theoretical concepts.
In Sergeant Moore's mind, the Rogers murders are part of the escalation of evil in society, a sign that the end is near. To Moore, the killer of the Rogers women is a demon, and he is charged by God to bring him to justice.
I believe that the Lord puts people in certain areas of life, and that's, you know, you're there. So where you're at, that's where he's placed you to be, to do the best you can be.
When we return, Sergeant Moore gets a major break in the investigation. 3 years later, investigators still have not found the killer of the Rogers family.
We did establish like a personal bond, so to speak, with them. We put their pictures up on a board, their little girl pictures of the two girls standing next to a Christmas tree, and also portrait pictures of them as a daily reminder to us of who we were fighting this battle for. I prayed every day on the way to work, not only for my family and other people and things like that, but I would pray about the investigation, and that if the Lord saw fit to let us get to an end result, that, you know, maybe today would be the day.
Desperate to find the killer, detectives launch a media blitz to generate new interest in the case. Unsolved Mysteries broadcasts a segment on the murders. Investigators work the telephone lines, hoping to get a solid lead.
This guy is very capable of doing this again, and we need your help finding him. So we released a lot of information at the very first news conference to the public through the media to get them refocused.
At that press conference, Moore unveils a blow-up of the handwriting on the brochure found in the Rogers car.
We put out that we believed that the person who wrote this, in all likelihood, could be the killer of the Rogers women, and we wanted people to look for this handwriting.
Moore hopes his strategy will smoke out the killer.
I believe that the person was still in our midst. If we did any type of media release or anything else, that he was going to be watching that. So I wanted to send him a clear sign that we were coming after him and that he could not rest because we were going to find him. Because one of the things I wanted him to do was get nervous, get scared, do something stupid, you know, run, pack up his bags. You know, anything that we could generate some action by him that would create suspicion by neighbors, family, or whatever.
The morning after Moore's press conference, Joanne Steffi sees an article in the newspaper with the blow-up of the killer's handwriting. Steffi believes her neighbor, Moselle Smith, may have a critical piece of evidence, a sample of his handwriting.
He was putting an aluminum enclosure porch on a house, and it was the written estimate. Well, when I think Smitty handed it to me and said, "Here, go ahead and take a look at it," and I had the copy from the paper. I looked at that paper, and my knees went out from under me. I mean, it was just bam. I mean, I knew. I looked at it. It's him. Look at this. It's him. Smitty said, "Well, my God, Joanne, if it is, I hope they can find the son of a bitch."
Steffi calls police with the lead and the name of her old neighbor, Oba Chandler. Hers is one of over 1,000 tips that have come in. No one calls her back. 6 weeks later, on June 30th, 1992, Moore displays the mystery handwriting on billboards across the city. This prompts yet another call from Joanne Steffi.
Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I had him on the phone. What the hell are you doing? You've got it. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? I was stonewalled. Now, during that time, I'm scared. I left town for a couple of weeks just to get away from here. We'd come back and would call. Nothing. Nothing.
2 months later, her persistence finally pays off. Moore sends investigators to obtain an original copy of the contract with Oba Chandler's handwriting on it.
And once the handwriting came in and the forensic people looked at it, it was clearly a match. And things really heated up at that point, and we were working long hours and long days to try to put a case together.
Steffi tells Detective Moore that Chandler lived directly across the bay from the boat dock where the Rogers car was found. A background check on Chandler reveals a long rap sheet, including arrests for counterfeiting, burglary, and armed robbery.
He was a peeping Tom, and of course he had a boat and a car that matched the description from the rape victim in Canada, that description that we had.
A mugshot photo of Chandler bears an uncanny resemblance to the composite sketch of the Madeira Beach rape suspect from years earlier. 3 years after the murders, investigators are ecstatic.
Oh, we have got the guy. But then it was right back at it. Now we know who he is. Now how we get him in jail? How do we arrest him? How do we convict him? How do we do what we came here for?
Moore wants Chandler off the streets. Because he doesn't have enough evidence to arrest him for murder, he reopens the Madeira Beach rape investigation.
They took a photo of Chandler to the woman up in Canada who had been raped off of Madeira Beach and showed it had her, and she picked it out of I think a photo pack. So she was able to identify Chandler as her attacker.
At the same time, Moore puts Chandler under round-the-clock surveillance. Police post a video camera near Chandler's front door and tap his phone. An unmarked car tails Chandler's every move.
We get to the point of we say, okay, we're going to arrest him. We're not waiting any longer. And they had him surrounded at that point. People were moving in positions. A big thunderstorm comes through. The people on the ground at the moment lost the visual on him, and he pulled out somewhere, went on a side street, next thing, and he was gone.
At that point, they're sure that this guy is not just a rapist, but a murderer of these three women.
Then, by tracing a phone call he makes to his wife, police learn that Chandler is on his way home. When investigators finally pinpoint his location, Sergeant Moore arrests him for the Madeira Beach rape.
I thought it would be interesting to see what his reaction was, but his reaction was nothing. It was like, what took you so long?
He didn't impress me at all as being a smooth talker or even a ladies' man or a con artist. I really wondered when I finally met him what people found so interesting about him.
With Chandler in custody, Moore and his team must find a way to prove he murdered the Rogers women. When we return, Oba Chandler is brought to trial, but the investigation is not over. Three years after the murders, Oba Chandler is in jail on the Madeira Beach rape charge. The state attorney's office needs more evidence to indict Chandler for the murders of the Rogers women. Because Chandler no longer owns the blue and white boat that police believe he used in the murders, investigators search his house and even dredge the canal behind it, looking for clues.
He was a very, very odd person. Some of the men we interviewed felt uncomfortable around Chandler because they thought he was too friendly toward women, too outgoing, and a lot of the people could see right through him, that he was all talk.
They find 41-year-old Oba Chandler has a talent for moving from woman to woman. A year before the murder, Chandler married Deborah Ann Whitman, his fifth wife. They bought a house on Dalton Avenue in Tampa Bay.
Police quickly learned he'd been in trouble with the law and had had a very violent past virtually all his life. And it had intensified in the years before the murders.
Back when we were growing up, you know, we used to go rat hunting. Big rats, street rats, you know? Okay. And I like remember him with the stick, and he'd put a nail on the end of it, and he would kill the rats. And he'd say, "Well, sis, there's another one that won't bite you."
Family members tell investigators there was a turning point at age 10.
Chandler found his father hanging in the basement. So that was pretty traumatic. His criminal activity started after that, very soon after that.
At his father's funeral, Chandler threw himself into the open grave and kicked at his father's coffin. At 14, he was stealing cars.
My whole life has been running from the police. Starting from 1969, when I was first arrested. You gotta remember something, where I was raised up as a kid. The majority of the time, you wasn't arrested. When you was caught doing something, you got the beat out of you with sticks, nightsticks by the cops.
Investigators finally locate Chandler's boat. He had sold it only months after the murders. It matches the exact description given to police by the rape victim. The state attorney indicts Chandler for the murders. On September 19, 1994, Oba Chandler goes to trial, 5 years after the murder of Joe, Michelle, and Christy Rogers. Defense attorney Fred Zinnober says the prosecution's case has no real evidence tying Chandler to the murders.
Try as they might, they couldn't find anything to link this guy to the crime, and Chandler absolutely, 100% insisted that, yes, I met these ladies, I gave them directions, but I had nothing to do with that this was just a series of bad coincidences that led to fingers being pointed at him, but didn't lead to proof beyond a reasonable doubt that this is the right guy.
The prosecution does not have proof that Chandler was out on the water that night. So as the trial continues, so does the investigation.
One of our investigators was very persistent in going after the phone records for the Chandler's residence. And even though we'd been repeatedly told they were not in existence, he convinced some people at General Telephone to continue looking.
They were able to establish for sure he was on the water those nights, and that was crucial. That was what they call the silver bullet.
And they actually found records that showed marine phone tolls to his house on both the day of the Madeira Beach rape and 5 calls on June 2nd, ranging from about 1 a.m., 3 calls between 1 a.m. and 1:30, and 2 more calls around 8 to 10 p.m., 10 a.m. the next day. And that put him on the water the entire night of the murder and put him on the water the day of the Madeira Beach rape.
Chandler eventually admits that he was out on the water all night, but alone.
Oba Chandler thinks he can talk his way out of and into anything. So he thought he could talk his way out of, tell the jury that he didn't have anything to do with it.
Chandler says the reason that he was out on the water all night was because his boat had a fuel leak. Hoping to trip up Chandler, prosecutor Doug Crow asks him to point out in a photo of his boat where the broken fuel line was located.
In the front of the engine, up in the front.
Okay, where? Up in here?
Well, the gas lines come from the gas tank, which is under the floor here.
As soon as he started testifying to that, we started contacting experts in the boating field, and we found one that actually worked for Florida Marine Patrol and had him examine this boat, to examine this fuel system, what he had described, and see if that could happen. Well, after his examination of it, he found out there was no way possible for it to happen what Oba said could happen.
Chandler is caught in a lie.
Doug kept coming at him, and you could see him Chandler getting just more and more frustrated, and his face was growing red, and he was angry. And he actually said to the judge, "I'm sorry, Judge, he really irritates me." And Judge Schaefer said, "This is one of the best trial lawyers around. You don't want to be trying to trade barbs with him, just answers questions."
I don't know. I can't see the gas tank.
Do you know where the gas tanks are?
I know it's in the floor, but I don't know where.
But he went right after him and just right for the jugular. And it worked because it got Oba so shook Everything that was coming out of his mouth wasn't making sense.
With the evidence from the phone records, the testimony of the Canadian rape victim, and Chandler lying on the stand, the jury needs little more than an hour to find him guilty. On September 29, 1994, Chandler is convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. A month after the trial and his conviction for the murders of Joe, Michelle, and Christy Rogers, Chandler appears before Judge Schaefer for sentencing. She describes the horror of Chandler's crime.
1 victim was first, 2 watched. Imagine the fear. 1 victim was second, 1 watched. Imagine the horror. Finally, the last victim, who had seen the other 2 disappear over the side, was lifted up and thrown overboard. Imagine the terror. Oh, but Chandler, you have not only forfeited your right to live among us, under the laws of the state of Florida, you have forfeited your right to live at all.
We had a couple people on the jury who were not in favor of the death sentence, and the verdict was unanimous for the death sentence because the crime was so horrible and their deaths were so prolonged, and their torture and fear just was allowed to mount until they finally did die or seep into blessed unconsciousness.
Oba Chandler is on death row at a Florida state prison. He has lost all his appeals, but still maintains his innocence.
They simply asked me directions, that's it. We're lost, we're looking for the Days Inn over here, and I thought that they was talking about the Days Inn that was just right across the interstate there. And when I says, well, just because, they said it's on 60, Route 60. That's when I said, well, it's right here, And that's when the kid stuck her head up out of the side of the car and was hollering Rocky Point. I says, well, you don't want that one. You don't want to go down 60. Get up on the expressway, go down this way, and that was it. That was it. I never saw him again. I just had the basic misfortune of meeting these people, that's all.
I feel definitely that he's killed other people. I mean, in my mind, there's no doubt. I'm glad he's off the streets. And anyone that can kill someone like he did is.
But the reality for me is to know that there's plenty of other ones out there taking his place. That's the sad part about it is we can't seem to get our hands on all of them.
All those people who worked on it, I think they'd all agree that it was worth it. You cannot allow someone to do what happened to Joe and her daughters and get away with it. And I think it's really important to the rest of us that the system did not forget them. The system fails sometimes, but in this case, the system went after justice with just incredible energy and creativity, and they worked their butts off. An awful lot of people to see that justice was done.
I believe that Oba Chandler is demon possessed. For whatever reason, I was put in a place to go after him. Oba is assigned by the Word of God that he'll pay for what he's done. So that's not in my hands anymore. It's in God's hands. What's going to be the end demise of him? And if it is that he be executed, then he's executed. And that's the way it is. I can't do anything about that. Evil will pay.